let us strip away the stadium roars and dive into a 20 to 30-second tale of pure grit. The most monumental shifts in athletic history rarely occur under blinding arena lights. Picture zero spectators, zero flashing lenses, merely a desolate sheet of ice. Yet, those freezing, forgotten shadows are exactly where the entire game is rewritten. That is precisely the narrative Rafael Arutyunian paints when recalling a seemingly ordinary drill featuring his prodigy, Ilia. There were no medals on the line, nor was it marked on any calendar, but a single, gravity-defying launch brought the entire facility to a breathless halt. The stun factor was not about flawless execution, but rather that veteran eyes, accustomed to daily greatness, suddenly realized they had just witnessed an absolute glitch in reality. Only now is the legendary mentor pulling back the curtain. That particular dawn at the Irvine, California facility felt exceptionally hushed. It was not totally mute, of course, because frozen arenas possess their own heartbeat. You always have that sharp, metallic hiss of steel slicing into the frozen crust. There is the constant vibrating drone of the subterranean chillers, mingled with an occasional tactical bark from a trainer leaning over the plastic walls. Compared to the electric chaos of a championship eve, however, it felt like a ghost town. Only a handful of athletes were wrapping up their morning stretches. An exhausted instructor slumped against the glass, nursing a paper cup of dark roast that had lost its warmth hours ago. A muffled beat pulsed from a tiny soundbox near the exit gates. Out there in the center, Ilia was executing the exact same rituals he had drilled a million times over. Just another grueling grind in the dark. Zero major events looming, no broadcasting crews, no stern critics clutching scorecards, merely raw, unglamorous labor. Or so it appeared to the casual observer. Rafael stood at his usual post by the perimeter, arms locked across his chest, demeanor completely casual, tracking his pupil like a silent hawk. Anyone familiar with his legendary methods will tell you one thing. His absolute silence is the ultimate indicator of hyper-focused scrutiny. Up until that minute, Ilia was casually carving through his typical airborne setups. He was knocking out rapid-fire chains and metronome exercises, the exact flavor of monotonous repetition that would put an average fan to sleep in 60 seconds. Yet, within the realm of the truly elite, those endless, echoing loops are the secret forge where champions are truly minted. It is easy to completely forget this reality when you are glued to a high-stakes broadcast in your living room. Every gravity-defying spin you witness bathed in stadium spotlights was paid for with 1,000 falls in desolate, freezing buildings exactly like this. Suddenly, the hypnotic metronome of the session broke. Ilia drifted toward the deepest corner of the arena and hit the brakes. It was not a theatrical stop, merely an extended coasting motion, a quick pivot, and then a second rotation to kill his momentum. A supporting trainer would later recall how that tiny fragment of time acted like an alarm bell, simply because this kid never, ever second-guesses a launch. Under typical circumstances, he operates on a lethal, instinctual autopilot, where his muscles fire before his brain even registers the command. Yet here, he carved a wide circle and then repeated the loop. Had you been leaning over the sideboards right then, you would have seen Rafael cock his head by a mere fraction of an inch. Not panicked, just intensely intrigued. To be fair, micro-adjustments of this nature unfold during daily prep constantly. Athletes are always tweaking their rhythms, experimenting with fresh angles, or just feeling out their leg strength. Despite all that, the geometry of this specific approach screamed that something alien was coming. He suddenly exploded forward, gathering terrifying velocity right against the outer wall. The steel under his boots roared, ripping angry, audible gashes into the frost. His pace went from fast to blistering, unleashing the unmistakable, reckless power that precedes a mammoth flight. A handful of bystanders casually lifted their gazes, operating purely on reflex. Routine takeoffs are basically background noise here. 99% of them vanish from memory the moment they end, but occasionally, an athlete's physical aura loudly broadcasts that history is about to be made. The prodigy dropped his shoulders into a predatory crouch as he locked onto his liftoff trajectory. In that split second, Rafael abandoned his relaxed stance. He did not shout or wave, but the shift was palpable enough that a nearby observer caught him inching dangerously close to the protective glass. He offered zero verbal commands, sounding no alarms, just pure, magnetic focus. This is the sixth sense that trainers acquire after dedicating their entire lives to shaping superhumans. They develop an uncanny radar, instantly recognizing the exact moment a mundane drill mutates into something monstrous. Then, The very oxygen in the building seemed to vanish a millisecond prior to his lift. There was no thunderous crack, but the tension spiked so sharply that scattered onlookers froze dead in their tracks to stare. The sequence of events that immediately followed became the sole reason Raphael eventually broke his stoic silence to the press. Back then, though, it was supposedly just another notch on the training belt. Or, quite frankly, that was the illusion everyone was under. Visually, the mechanics disguised themselves as standard procedure. You saw the rapid acceleration tracing the perimeter, the fierce edge grip, and the arms locking into a tight strike pose. Veterans of the winter sports world recognize this exact frame. It is the suffocating, silent fraction of a heartbeat prior to leaving the ground where absolute perfection is mandatory. The center of gravity, the rhythmic snap, the deadly tilt of the metal all must align. That particular dawn in California, the universe snapped together in a blinding flash. Ilia drove his outside blade violently into the frozen surface and detonated into the empty air above him. His time in flight was over before a clock could tick, yet the psychological shockwave rippled through the facility for what felt like hours. Spectators were momentarily paralyzed, their brains utterly failing to compute the physics they had just witnessed. A junior competitor lingering near the entrance admitted afterward that he dropped his eyes to the frozen floor rather than tracking the airborne boy, half expecting to see actual magic etched into the frost. Such mind-bending anomalies are a rare chaotic beauty in the athletic realm. Your cognitive processors desperately scramble to make sense of the impossible. He slammed back down to the earth, and no, the touchdown was far from flawless. A harsh grind of steel against frozen water echoed as he wrestled gravity for a clean touchdown, throwing his arms out in a desperate bid for equilibrium. The sheer velocity dragged him yards down the rink before his pace finally bled away. He offered zero fist pumps and zero theatrics, only a brief, silent coast and a fleeting look at the barrier. To an untrained eye watching from the bleachers, the maneuver disguised itself as just another routine practice rep. Yet the profound, heavy quiet settling over the arena screamed otherwise. Across the ice, an instructor correcting a beginner's form simply swallowed his words midway through a breath. Over by the exit, a spectator turned into a statue, fingers locked tight around the brass door pull. Pandemonium hadn't broken out, nor had cheers erupted. Instead, a suffocating stillness reigned. It was that exact, breathless vacuum in time that drops when a room collectively processes an absolute anomaly. Propped against the glass, Raphael Arutyunyan shifted his weight ever so subtly. He offered zero instant feedback. Veteran mentors operate like that, prioritizing cold analysis over raw emotion. His brain instantly dissected the launch trajectory, the blur of the spin, the friction of the descent. Finally, he lifted his gaze, completely robbed of speech for several heavy seconds. Anyone who has spent decades bleeding and breathing this winter sport understands the gravity of such a fraction of time. Ice skating perpetually dances on a razor-thin wire between elegant choreography and terrifying physics. Lately, however, the athletic boundary has shattered expectations at a blistering, unprecedented pace. Meanwhile, Ilia carved a lazy arc across the icy surface, casually steering himself right back toward the middle of the arena. A hushed voice finally shattered the spell from the sidelines, barely a whisper floating in Raphael's direction. Did he really just? The inquiry died on their tongue, completely unnecessary when every single witness already possessed the impossible answer. The exact flight path the young skater had just navigated was a holy grail the athletic community had debated in hushed, reverent tones for decades. It represented a terrifying defiance of human biomechanics and gravity itself, the quadruple axel, demanding a monstrous 4.5 mid-air revolutions before the blade ever meets ice. For generations, seasoned analysts and physicists alike had written off the maneuver as a purely hypothetical fantasy destined to stay confined to chalkboards. Yet, reality had just rewritten itself during a remarkably unremarkable morning skate. The teenager simply drifted over to the wall, breaking to a gentle halt beside his mentor. They exchanged a fleeting exchange of words, muted to the point where any eavesdropper stretching their ears caught absolutely nothing. When Raphael eventually broke his silence on the ordeal, his perspective was fascinatingly bizarre. He claimed the aerial miracle wasn't actually the detail that struck him most. What chilled the veteran was his prodigy's demeanor upon touching down devoid of adrenaline spikes, missing the celebratory grin, completely utterly numb to the historical earthquake he had just triggered. He possessed only an icy, robotic tunnel vision, behaving as though his brain had already fast-forwarded to mapping out the subsequent drill. Instances of such profound stoicism expose a terrifying psychological edge that scoreboards categorically fail to capture. The grandest revolutions in sports history frequently unfold in shadowy, desolate arenas, miles away from the glaring lenses of broadcast television. On that frigid sunrise, completely devoid of any grand fanfare, a handful of shivering spectators scattered throughout the bleachers had unwittingly absorbed a piece of immortality, a lightning strike of genius whose true magnitude wouldn't be recognized until the dust settled years down the line. For a handful of agonizing minutes following the feat, a surreal aura of normalcy forcefully resumed. A tinny, cheap speaker perched on the railing began pumping out upbeat rhythm tracks once more. A completely different athlete pushed off into a glide, while an assistant lazily swept up a scattering of bright plastic markers from a previous agility circuit. Zoom out, and the scene painted a picture of absolute, boring routine. Zoom in, however, and the hawkish glare of Arutunian betrayed the illusion. His laser focus remained hopelessly locked onto the frozen floor. Instructors forged in the brutal fires of champion building cultivate a rather peculiar, unbreakable psychological trait over the decades. A solitary flash of brilliance rarely provokes a flinch. A singular, monstrous aerial trick, no matter how jaw-dropping, essentially holds zero weight in isolation. Relentless, punishing repetition is the only currency they value. Yet an invisible electricity crackled through this specific, isolated heartbeat in time. The prodigy leaned his weight heavily onto the plastic divider, inhaling in measured, rhythmic gasps, while absorbing a low, incredibly tranquil string of instructions from his master. They spared no wild arm flailing and absolutely zero triumphant shouts, just an intensely subdued briefing. A second later, the teenager forcefully kicked away from the fiberglass wall, retreating to the dead center of the Colosseum. Anyone privileged enough to witness a top-tier performer drill understands the frankly terrifying speed at which they can purge a high-stakes failure or triumph from their psyche. The instant a sequence concludes, their mental machinery mercilessly clicks over to the upcoming attempt. Fascinatingly, Raphael later confessed his radar had completely abandoned the physics of the trick itself, locking instead onto his pupil's physical anatomy. Half a century of molding prodigies had gifted him the uncanny superpower to decode invisible, microscopic bodily cues. The violent snap of a boot against the frozen surface, the subtle slump or flare of a clavicle, the cadence of oxygen intake during breaks, it all painted a silent masterpiece of information. And in his professional estimation, the young phenomenon was a portrait of lethal serenity. Not a fraction of a wince, not a single micro-tremor of doubt. That specific lack of agony was infinitely more terrifying than the public could ever comprehend, entirely because of the monstrous nature of the beast he had just unleashed, the Quadruple Axel. Launching into that maneuver subjects the human skeleton to a catastrophic degree of force. Generating 4.5 airborne spins demands a violently explosive liftoff, coupled with a shockingly surgical mastery of impact absorption. The overwhelming majority of daredevils who even dare to flirt with the concept find their joints spectacularly destroyed by the sheer kinetic trauma of returning to Earth. Frequently, the gamble results in a brutal, bone-rattling crash against the ice. Other times, human physiology point-blank denies the necessary torque. Yet, on this particular dawn, the teenager remained an immovable rock. The veteran mentor's gaze tracked the kid as he aggressively gathered momentum along the perimeter glass. This subsequent run, however, was clearly pivoting away from the impossible. He carved out a completely different approach path, violently ripping through a flawless, clinical triple combination, a blatant signaling that the standard, grueling practice tempo had officially resumed. Behind the coach's stoic eyes, though, a supercomputer was fiercely calculating the magnitude of the morning's earlier earthquake. Decades entrenched in the icy trenches of this sport had hammered a profound truth into his soul regarding these historical flashes. Absolute revolutions absolutely refuse to arrive with trumpets and fireworks. Instead, they sneak through the back door in terrifying silence, disguising themselves as completely mundane repetitions on a random, unremarkable Tuesday. Often, the athlete on the ice remains completely oblivious to the sheer gravity of what they just pulled off. Midway through the grind, Raphael pushed off the boards, pacing a short distance along the frozen perimeter. A fellow instructor leaned in with a loaded whisper. "Does the kid even realize what he did?" Raphael hesitated, letting the silence hang. Onlookers swear he just offered a faint smirk and a careless roll of his shoulders, masking the reality that nobody truly had a clue. The phenom had launched into the air with his usual cold-blooded precision locked in, totally calculating. his brain already dissecting flaws to fix rather than bathing in the glory of the trick. That relentless hunger, Raphael would eventually hint, is the exact secret weapon propelling Ilia to violently shatter the discipline's absolute boundaries. Yet, within the tight-knit elite skating bubble, shockwaves like this ripple in total secrecy, just a murmured word passing from one veteran mentor to another. A rival catches a rumor in the locker room ahead of a major event, or a lucky eyewitness finally spills the tea weeks down the line. Hushed whispers in hidden corners. Before Friday rolled around, a tiny, exclusive fraction of the industry was already dissecting that fateful morning. No flashy press releases, just covert chatter. But here was the genuine kicker. The gossip extended far beyond the actual maneuver itself. They were buzzing about the terrifying implications for tomorrow. Because the second an impossible ceiling shatters, the whole world order of the arena gets flipped upside down. Raphael felt that seismic shift in his bones. He simply refused to breathe a word of it aloud just yet. To the average spectator, this entire universe exists only in fleeting, dazzling flashes. A primetime television broadcast, blinding stadium spotlights, and hyped-up announcers breaking down points over a mesmerizing, frame-by-frame replay of a spinning athlete. Yet the masses remain utterly blind to the brutal, endless months stretching between the glamour, the agonizing drills, the exhausting flights, the ice baths, and the relentless loop of practice. For a generational freak of nature like Ilia Malinin, that downtime is suffocatingly heavy because the minute you get branded as a boundary breaker, the world demands perfection on demand. Every single routine is dissected under a microscope. A mere practice leap threatens to break the internet. Deep within the inner circle, insiders had already slapped him with a mythic title, the Quad God. Obviously, it lacked any formal sanction, functioning purely as an awestruck label born from crowds and broadcasters, watching him string together aerial combos that defied human gravity. Epic monikers might stroke the ego, but they also drop an anvil of unimaginable pressure right onto your shoulders. From coast to coast, kids in freezing local arenas were obsessively mimicking his takeoff mechanics. Veteran gurus scrutinized his airtime pixel by bleeding pixel. Pundits furiously debated whether the ultimate upper limit of men's athletics had just been violently shoved into the stratosphere. You would not hear a peep of that noise inside the Irvine facility during morning drills, yet an undeniable electricity was permanently altering the air. Rafael Arutunyan comprehended that storm brewing better than a seasoned sailor. He had sculpted golden legends before, after all. He had witnessed prodigies rocket to stardom, only to violently crash and burn beneath the crushing weight of their own monumental triumphs. That grim reality is precisely why insiders claim the master coach practically banishes the words record or history from the daily grind. He zeroes in entirely on the microscopic details. The terrifyingly precise tilt of a blade, the split-second rhythm binding a double aerial assault, and the maddening, silent willpower demanded to drill a single sequence hundreds of times until bone and muscle act on pure instinct. Yet, despite building an impenetrable fortress of focus, the chaos of the outside realm always bleeds through the cracks. Corporate backers start demanding sneak peeks at upcoming choreography. Tournament directors practically beg to know which gravity-defying stunts will headline the winter. Reporters flood the phone lines, aggressively hunting for a soundbite about gold medal destiny. Meanwhile, a dark cloud of dread steadily gathers in the periphery, ticking away like a bomb, because the 4-year global timeline is notoriously unforgiving. Any athlete strapping on skates knows the brutal truth. Your prime is a shockingly brief flash in the pan, maybe a couple of winters, or tragically less. Months after that legendary morning, the veteran guru dropped a bombshell during a sit-down that made the entire community freeze and listen. He stated, "The absolute nightmare of molding champions is not forcing them into the air. It is surviving the fallout when the globe demands a literal miracle the second their blades touch the frost." To put it bluntly, delivering magic on command becomes infinitely more agonizing than inventing it once. Back on that fateful morning, the young prodigy glided toward the glass for a quick breather. A bystander tossed him a rag. A rinkmate drifted past with a silent nod of respect. The tension broke and a mundane calm washed back over the frozen room. But Raphael confessed much later that the haunting vision of that launch echoed in his skull until midnight, not for its theatrical flair, but because it signaled an undeniable, terrifying evolution. These are the hidden, earth-shattering turning points that strike long before the masses comprehend that the game has mutated forever. And if this seismic shift proved authentic, it was infinitely bigger than a single landed trick. It meant the invisible ceiling of human capability on ice had just been violently shoved upward. Yet the seasoned mentor kept his lips completely sealed, refusing to broadcast the revelation to the ravenous crowds. He simply bided his time, because in the ruthless theater of professional athletics, a master's silence screams much louder than a megaphone ever could. As the final buzzer of practice rang out, the arena slipped seamlessly back into its deceptively ordinary, grinding heartbeat. Melodies drifting across the frozen arena, athletes endlessly drilling their choreography, and mentors whispering crucial technical tweaks against the chilly fiberglass barrier. To the casual passerby, the California facility hummed with its typical daily grind, yet the most monumental shifts in athletic history rarely announced their arrival with a warning siren. Occasionally, these tectonic paradigm shifts lurk in the shadows, marinating completely unnoticed for agonizing weeks or even entire seasons. Such was the destiny of the breathtaking leap a few lucky bystanders witnessed at dawn, a gravity-defying secret that mastermind Rafael Arutunyan deliberately kept away from the press. Truth be told, he locked that revelation tightly within their inner sanctum for an eternity, executing a perfectly calculated maneuver of absolute silence. Veteran strategists know all too well that innocent whispers echoing off the ice can explode into raging media wildfires in mere seconds. Just one experimental launch during practice transforms instantly into glaring front-page news, wild conspiracy theories, and suffocating pressure. Navigating that crushing burden of anticipation remains the ultimate trial for any champion, and around Ilia Malinin, the blinding glare of fame was already reaching a fever pitch. Having flawlessly conquered the mythical Quad Axel under arena lights in 2022, he shattered a global barrier humanity had deemed utterly impossible. The entire discourse surrounding the destiny of competitive male ice dancing morphed in a single heartbeat, leaving terrified pundits obsessed with one chilling inquiry. Should a lone prodigy obliterate the ultimate athletic ceiling with such violence, what terrifying new frontiers could possibly await us? Deep within the skating community, fiery civil wars raged on as purists argued passionately that chasing such dangerous acrobatic extremes would ultimately slaughter the soul and beauty of the performance. Meanwhile, the modernists countered fiercely, insisting that human evolution on the ice has always demanded this exact type of reckless courage. Every era violently shatters boundaries, forcing successors to adapt or perish. Yet, caught in the crossfire of this philosophical war, warriors like Ilia merely laced up their skates and grinded relentlessly, which perfectly explains why his mentor eventually reflected upon that awe-inspiring morning run with an eerily tranquil, almost clinical demeanor. The veteran flatly refused to label the feat as legendary or groundbreaking, opting instead to drop a profound yet incredibly understated truth on camera. He declared it was merely the upcoming chapter of their journey, absolutely not the grand finale, simply the logical progression of their brutal craft. Reflecting deeply upon those words reveals the hidden, almost robotic psychology driving true champions as they conquer impossible milestones. Feats that leave ordinary mortals breathless are just another day at the office for these titans. One more takeoff, one tiny biomechanical tweak, one relentless march into greatness. Nevertheless, those silent, grinding repetitions secretly fused together to manifest a destiny far grander and more terrifying than anyone dared to imagine. At this very second, in some freezing arena miles away, an unknown rookie is likely dissecting smartphone footage of those gravity-defying flights, dreaming of launching their own miracle into the rafters. This is the raw, beating heart of athletic evolution. It never hinges on a singular fiery explosion, but rather countless microscopic victories that rewrite the laws of physics, dragging our narrative right back to that unassuming sunrise in California. An ordinary grind on the ice, a launch into the stratosphere, and a sudden, breathless hush that consumed the entire building. In that fleeting split second, absolutely nobody realized a legacy was born. Yet, in hindsight, his coach clearly recognized an invisible tremor in the fabric of the sport. It was deafening in its silence, a microscopic ripple powerful enough to alter reality. Perhaps that is the most haunting realization of all. If that breathtaking airborne rotation truly previewed the next era of winter athletics, the final pages of this epic saga remain completely unwritten.